Welcome to the X Podcast. You're listening to Russ Moore, sitting here across from grinning Tim Moore, co-host of the year, in his
co-host of the year,
co-host of the year, in his baby sky blue. How are you?
Is that what you call this? Is this sky blue?
Sky blue.
Baby sky blue.
Baby sky blue.
That's my color this season.
You always
I think I have
eyes were baby blues.
I have like 3 shirts this color now. I think this is my color for the season.
Old Blue Eyes. Who is that? What's his name?
Oh, the singer.
Yeah.
Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra.
Old Blue Eyes. Yeah.
Old Blue Eyes.
So how was your weekend?
It was memorable.
Muddy.
And memorable and muddy. Meaningful and messy.
What did you do? Go explain it for our wonderful viewers and listeners.
So I mentioned this in the last podcast, what I was getting ready to do, but I went on a Kentucky relay trail run. It's a lot of words. I can't remember how it's officially called. But basically,
it's called the Kentucky Derby.
No, that is not it. But it's a relay race.
Yeah.
And so Brock, who's part of our community, we've actually had him on the podcast before. He's just made of a different material. He runs 100-milers. He runs ultras for fun. He's getting ready to run another 100-miler called the Mohican in 2 weeks. Insane. But he asked me a while back if I wanted to be a part of this relay race, and they have them all over. In fact, they actually have one near here, closer than Kentucky, in a few weeks. But for some reason, this is the one that worked out. I think because of his schedule.
Probably because of his other race.
Yeah, because of his other race. So anyways, we were 4 hours away in Brandenburg, Kentucky. It's like an hour outside of Louisville. And they're teams of 8, and the goal is to run 120 miles. In the fastest time possible. And it's not super competitive in the sense that like people are just I don't even know if there's some sort of prize for the winner. It's really more this community that loves to run, loves trail running, loves that whole vibe.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting. Left Thursday, got there. I mean, the whole camp experience. You have an area where you just camp and there's tents and you bring your food. There's an area where you can sort of get supplies and food called the village area, where the people that put on Ragnar, it's called Ragnar Relay. Ragnar Relay. Yeah, and so they have their own like tents where there's a couple food trucks out and there's coffee stations in the morning.
What did you bring? Because I don't picture you as the food bringer.
Oh, well, I brought some protein shakes. Some Power Crunch bars.
That's basically what I would assume you would live on.
A gallon of water. I did plan ahead and buy Element electrolyte packets.
Okay.
Tim Ferriss always talks about those. But like
food.
I didn't bring even. So
I knew it.
So Brock told me that he already had the food covered, and so it was actually pretty cool. So we camped out. And that first night, he brought his little portable grill and cooked elk burgers for us. And they're actually really good.
Were they?
And then his brother Brian came, whose wife had prepared just a vat full of protein balls of flaxseed. And I probably ate 30 of them. They were incredible. And then there's a food truck.
Protein balls.
That had like these wild types of like hot dogs and sausages. And it was really interesting. And then there's a whole recovery station where they had Athletic Brewing Company, these like non-alcoholic lagers that were really cold for recovery that you drink afterwards. They're really interesting. And
so did you ruin your shoes?
Well, so I didn't overinvest, but I knew one of the most integral parts of this are the shoes that you have. And so for trail running, they all say there's nothing better than Hoka's, the Speed Demon 5.0.
But they have to be a trail shoe, right?
It's a trail shoe. So the Speed Goat 5.0 is the like pinnacle trail shoe of Hoka's. And so I bought those. I wish people would have told me that they're horrible on flat surfaces, because I tried to break them in a week before and when I was running in German Village, kind of training for it, and hated them. I told Brock, I said, man, I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but I don't think I'm going to bring these. And he said, no, they feel awful on flat surfaces. You will love them on the trail.
Really?
They're made for the trail. Sure enough, he's right. I am so glad that I brought them for the trail. So anyways, it was a whole lot of fun. I mean, it was old style camping. I realized that I'm getting older because I could not sleep on the ground. I maybe got 3 hours of sleep in over 50-something hours of Thursday through Saturday night. Did not sleep at all, and it was 15 miles apiece, which, by the way, I told you I underestimated the difference between a flat road mile and a trail mile.
Yeah, you did.
Because I thought, okay, I got decent stamina. I was doing 6-mile runs in Schiller without much issue at all, and I knew that my 15 miles was going to be broken up into 3 legs. What I didn't anticipate is some of the legs would be different. So some of the legs would be only 4 miles, and then some of the legs would be 7 miles. And then the trail miles of elevation
Uphill.
and hills and jumping in and out of roots and like rocks and jumping over tree. I mean, it was just insane.
How fun.
So the crazy part, 2 things I'll just say. We won't spend too much time here. Number one, I thought about this while I was there. It has been really fun for me over the last few years to be in and observe so many different cultures.
Kentucky culture or running culture?
What I mean by that is, so like I went to support Tommy last year when he went to his bodybuilding competition. It's an entire culture. It's an entire culture of it's just interesting. The lingo, the vernacular, the vibe, the feel when you go into a bodybuilding competition. And it's just fun to be it's been fun for me to be able to open up my mindset even more. Yes. But it's been really, because you all, and you joked with me afterwards, so does that make you want to do a show? I said, absolutely not. Not only am I not built for a show, but I have no desire to do a show. But it was interesting to observe it. Yeah. Same thing going into this. It was really interesting being around the trail running culture. And Brock asked me afterwards, he's like, do you want to do more of these? I was like, not necessarily, but if we got a crew together, it'd be fun. But I did enjoy it. It's been fun just to be around, because I started picking on them. I said, okay, I noticed right away in this trail running culture, several things. Number one, none of you have Apple products. You all have Androids for phones for some reason. Okay. Number two, you all choose to use military time on purpose, and I don't know why. Number three, you all have the same weird generic old watches that you wear halfway up your arm. I said, and then they have their own language. Like he said, finally, you know me, I can't help. I eventually start laughing. He said, what are you laughing about? I said, I'm just having a blast listening to the language. I said, if I hear one more time the phrase, yeah, I was deep in the pain cave, I said, then I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And just hearing their different, lingo, it was fun, but it was the best group of guys.
Yeah.
I'll say this was an interesting thing. While I was doing it, I was like, this is fun. I'm glad I did it. I'm do hard things, that whole thing. But I didn't love it as much until afterwards. Looking back, it actually meant more. I'm like, oh, wow, the sense of accomplishment, the sense of camaraderie, looking back at my time with the guys, what we endured. And now I kind of really want to get a group of guys and do it again.
It's probably the same for any of those guys running marathons, ultra marathons, 100-milers. I can't imagine any of it feels good while you're doing it.
No. And I will say the worst part is, I told you, and this is my last little thing on it, is so I ran 4.5 miles, and it was a pretty brutal trail. And then it's like
a brag.
4 or 5 hours. No.
Took you 4 or 5 hours?
No, 4 or 5 hours later was my next leg, and that was about 4 miles. And that's when I realized, I'm not as in shape as I thought I was. I'm already so tired and sleep deprived. And it was actually, it was pretty brutal. The toughest part was the moment I got done with my second leg, it began pouring. I mean, raining, and didn't stop raining for 9 hours. I finally fell asleep for a few minutes, and around 4 a.m., Brock nudged me in the tent, and he said, hey, I just have to level with you. Your last and final leg, number one, is your longest leg. It's 7 miles. It's going to primarily be in the dark. And people are returning and telling us that the trails are absolutely wasted now. They are nothing but standing water, mud, and muck. So my last leg was 7 miles in the dark while it's raining through nothing but muck. And it took me about 3 times the amount of time of a normal run. It took me what would have been about an hour and 15, 20 minutes took me close to 3 hours.
That's as long as it takes people to run marathons.
Yeah. In about 3 hours. And I found out later, and I'm glad I gave myself a little bit of permission to go slower, because he told me, he said, do not try to do this fast. Just try to be safe and try to complete it.
Yeah.
He said, because it is dangerous. Like people. So I found out later that some of the people that did my same trail ended up sliding off through a mudslide into the river, and taking them about 30 minutes to get out. There are people that have done this for years that told me that trail, that leg, was one of the toughest they've ever seen in their life.
Wow.
So it was a whole lot of fun, and I'm here in one piece. And
I don't know how you survived that. But that's impressive.
So It was fun.
My weekend was nothing like that, so I got no stories to tell. That's pretty good. Well, glad to have you back. And today I thought we could talk about something, particularly that's right at this table.
Okay. Oh, what's that?
Your hat.
My hat.
Yeah, you're wearing a hat. I don't think I've ever seen. Is this new?
It is new. Okay.
It's inspiring a thought.
It's inspiring a thought. Okay, my hat, if you're not watching on YouTube, says, "These are the good old days."
Yeah, I don't think you could see that from the camera. It's pretty far away. It says, "These are the good old days."
These are the good old days.
Yeah. What are the good old days?
So, one of the reasons I bought this hat,
Yeah.
well, number one, I liked the design. I loved the kind of style and vibe of it, but also because I tend to be a very nostalgic person. At times, to my detriment, where I can get stuck in nostalgia.
What's the best decade ever?
Not a decade.
What's the best decade ever?
90s.
90s.
Yeah.
I think we all agree.
Yeah.
I think everybody listening right now agrees, even those that weren't alive.
But I think I told you, even on a serious note, like I've been trying to remind myself. I feel like the last couple years, as a church especially, I've had ups and downs in my own life, like we always do.
Yeah.
But man, these are really sweet days we're in.
Yes.
And I don't want to get attached to them where I don't change, but I also don't want to do what's so easy to do, which is take it for granted and be, so I heard somebody say one time, you're in trouble when you have more grievance than gratitude in your spirit.
Yeah.
And I want to remind myself how good these days are.
I agree.
And there's this, I know you're not an Office fan, but there's this.
I like The Office.
There's this amazing quote. I think it's in the season finale, in one of the most emotional scenes, and it's going around, and all the Office characters are, saying their goodbyes to the camera. And then Andy, he said, "Man, I get chills even as I think about it. It's one of the greatest lines." He goes, "Man, I wish there was a way to know that you were in the good old days while you're in them." And I always just love that thought. Like, how much more could we savor life and appreciate life? Because you always think the season before you is the good old days.
Right.
And so for me, the hat was also kind of a meaningful reminder. Like, because I don't think I'm ever going to struggle with vision and being excited about the future, but I can struggle at times with getting stuck in nostalgia. And so for me, it's a reminder, like, these are the good old days. There's even a proverb that says it's unwise to say, "I wish I was back in the good old days." So these are the good days.
What translation would that be? I don't know quite that verse. He's going to look it up. I'm just messing with you. I just don't recognize I was waiting for you to say something that would jog my memory exactly the way it is. But these are the good old days. So I was thinking about something I heard recently. I was listening to a message that just kind of sparked my mind that I thought we could talk about. And it's funny you just wore this hat because I feel like it kind of plays into it a little bit. And
Ecclesiastes 7:10.
Okay, so that's not Proverbs. But it is the same author.
Do not say, "Why were the old days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this."
Wait,
well, no, another translation says, "Don't long for the good old days. This is not wise." Ecclesiastes 7:10.
That's good. I like it. Don't long for the good old days. So jumping off that, I was really thinking as I was listening to a message, and it made my mind just started spinning and kind of going off thinking about stepping into the future and why it is that change is so hard. Why is it that, and here's what I've been thinking in my head, there are some things that I'm thinking about my own life and rhythms and things that I want to do or things that I want to change that I know in my head it's what I want, but for some reason I don't seem to get there. Do you have any of those in your head? Because I do. I've got lately I've been telling my wife,
when you keep not becoming what you tell yourself you're going to become.
Yes, and that's the problem. Like I keep not becoming what I keep saying. So here's one, like,
story of my life.
eating better. Like lately I've been just like I'm not had the greatest discipline. And I did for so long, but I have not, like, recently. I think we feel like we've had a lot of events, a lot of other things, and I've just slipped back into these, some old habits. And I keep going, I know I need to eat better. I know I need to have better discipline in those. And I want to get ready for summer. You get summer, there's always winter. It's like bodybuilders, but I'm not a bodybuilder. But bodybuilders, right? You bulk up in the winter, and then you lean out for the summer.
Yeah.
So I need to lean out for the summer, but I keep telling myself I need to do it, but I don't. And It just made me think in life how often we recognize change that we need and we want, but for some reason, I think it's really hard to get there.
Yes.
You notice that?
Yes.
Is that true in your life or not?
No, it's very, very true. Don't even know where to start, but I think it is so much more natural. You know, they say one of the things that's inevitable in life, the only thing that's inevitable in life is change. You know, other than they said, what's the only thing that's certain is death and taxes.
Yeah.
The only other thing that's certain is change.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it is really hard to be the progenitor of your own change. It is really difficult to escape the inertia of whatever your current patterns are, your current way of thinking is, your current way of doing it. It's nearly impossible.
And we don't like when someone else pulls us forward.
Yes.
Like there's a part of us, like you're talking about nostalgia. You know, I was thinking about how if you ask anybody, depending on when they lived, you know, what genre of music you like, what are some things, you know, like most people seem to go back to a time in their past.
Yeah.
When maybe it was good times, good old days, whatever it is, you know, like I asked you that the other day. I said, what decade was the best for music? And I think we would both say probably the 90s.
Yeah.
I mean, the 90s had the best music, right?
And do you ever get – it's so funny because I've been nostalgic since I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know what's crazy? I remember in third grade, me and my cousins, because I think my cousins are kind of wired like me. Maybe a bit of it is in the genes, but me and my cousins, I remember in the third grade reminiscing on second grade summers. I remember in fourth grade, me and my cousins being nostalgic over it, man. Those second grade summers were just the best. And so you know what's really interesting is someone, when I was on the way to Kentucky this past week in the car, Brock and Sarah, his wife, they were talking about how 2019 was like the greatest year for them ever. And it just got me thinking, and I ended up, because I make a highlights of the year every single year, and I went back and I realized like on a personal level, my best year that I have had since I've been in Columbus, Ohio, my favorite year is 2019.
Really?
And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and I
wonder if it's because of everything after that we compared to. It was like it went downhill from here, but
it might be. There's some personal reasons for that, but I was looking at my highlights of 2019, and 2019 was probably my most joy-filled year.
Wow.
And I was just looking back through it, and I was like, I'm getting nostalgic over this year.
That's funny.
And how much better are most things in my life, in the church, and but it can be really easy. I think part of it, I know we're not going to spend a ton of time psychoanalyzing. We want to talk about on maybe a bigger arena, a bigger spectrum. I do think part of it sometimes is when enough disappointment mingles with fear, it being hard to escape the belief that all the best things are behind you.
Oh, yeah.
And if you believe all the best things are behind you, it is really, I mean, one of the ways to continue to taste the best of what you think you'll ever have is to stay connected to it in your memories and stay connected to it in your emotions and stay connected to it. Even grieving can be a way of reliving and staying connected to what you're convinced is the best you'll ever have.
Yeah.
And when there's a lack of vision and hope for the future,
the
only thing left to do is to retreat in your mind and your memories and your emotion to what's behind you.
Yeah.
And that's why people relive the glory days and the good old days.
Yeah.
Or this is when I was at my best, or that relationship, or whatever it may be. And so I think nostalgia, disappointment, pain, lack of vision, those can all be emotional reasons why it's hard to change and move forward.
Well, I think you're tapping into something that I've been processing as I was thinking about this, because you're more nostalgic than I am. I'm not as nostalgic. I don't think back and go, gosh, man, 2013, that was just an amazing year. Like literally, I feel like I have, I don't know if it's the way my mind's wired. I literally almost never think about the past.
Yeah.
Like I'm just not, like if something happens, it forces me and I'm like, oh yeah, that was good. But I don't ever just, I never think about the past. I don't think about 2019. Oh, that was a great year. I don't, my mind, I think I'm just not wired very nostalgic. But I don't think so. What I guess I want to point out, I don't think that it's only nostalgic. You know, someone who's really nostalgic, because I'm not nostalgic, but I can still struggle with it.
Yeah.
But you said something that I do think is really, I want to peel back the layers of why we don't, because I think there's all these superfluous answers we can give for like, why is change hard? You know, and I think that some of it is biological. I think some of it is physical. I think our brains are designed that when it finds something good, that it creates neurons to support that through survival, through other things. And so what it does is it creates patterns. I talked about that a few weeks ago when we were doing mental health, and I talked about the basal ganglia and the part of the brain that's part of reward and habit forming and repetition. And so they kind of go together. So like, you know, when you have a good year, when you have a big moment, in something that's almost euphoric, that's just, there's joy, there's celebration, there's this, your brain really releases chemicals, and your brain is telling your body, this is good, I need more of this. And so our brains, I think, wire into patterns. And I think sometimes that locks us into that mode. I also think that one of the big things that really maybe keeps us from stepping forward, though, is really our emotional attachment that happens in certain seasons. I was thinking about how, you know, when something good happens in your life, or when you're in need of something and then you find it, you know, you're searching for something, that you create an emotional attachment that probably also is wired with your brain, but you create an emotional attachment to that thing. And I wonder if emotional attachment is actually the greatest enemy for change in our life. That, yes, I understand we have habits and we have things that but beyond that, I think on a deep level that we ascribe, you know, like you said, even those kind of moments that become so personal, so important in our lives, that it becomes the very thing that really blocks us from moving forward. Because as you said, we almost are measuring everything in the future with that. Because we're trying to keep that. As long as you're trying to keep that feeling, you're trying to keep that environment, you're trying to keep those people. As long as you can, because you feel like that's it.
And I think it's one of the things, I mean, it's such an interesting thought, and there's so many places you could go with it, because I think you can develop an emotional attachment to places. You can develop an emotional attachment to things. You can develop you obviously can develop an emotional attachment to people. And
they may not be good for you.
And they may not be good for you, or they could be good for you, or they could be good for you in a season. I think, you know, I heard somebody say one of the weights of people who love deeply is it's a sword that cuts both ways when you love deeply. Because that also means if you're not careful, you can create emotional attachments. It's some spiritual language at times. If that attachment goes across a certain line, is you know, kind of big language is a soul tie, where you almost have to sever what became an attachment in a season. And so there's probably an art of how do you let people in, how do you let experiences in richly and deeply without becoming tethered either to the wrong things or not knowing how to hold with an open hand the way that God is doing something in a season of your life. So like an example we talk about, it would be church. You know, on a faith context, falling in love with Jesus, it's an amazing thing. In a weird way, I want to have an emotional attachment to God. If I'm not careful, I can develop an emotional attachment with the way that I came to God. You know, you come to God in a certain type of church with a certain type of format and a certain type of feel and a certain type of song and a certain type of, and if I'm not careful, sometimes our emotional attachment becomes emotional associations, you know, and it's an emotional attachment by association. And therefore, if something changes in the way God does something, we see this with the children of Israel. Anytime God did something, they become attached with the way he did something. And so he would always switch up. He would still provide, but he would switch up the way he provides. He would heal, but he would switch up the way he heals. And I think it's a great observation you have. I think in general, in so many arenas of life, we struggle with emotional attachment instead of centering ourselves on something deeper.
I think that, I love that. I think we could even probably take that analogy a little bit deeper, I've been in ministry for 20 years, and you've been in ministry for a really long time as well. Maybe 33 years that you've been in ministry. And so I'm trying to make you older like you always tell me.
Yeah.
But I have definitely seen that through the years, that I think we can find something in one season that we so desperately needed, that we can create an emotional dependency, like on not only that, but like what you said, the way in which we needed it and we received it. Yeah. And I've seen that kind of throughout the years in church life. And I think this could be challenging for every single one of us, because we all have preferences. We all have things that we like. I think, when someone comes looking for a church, and we get this experience on a weekly basis, we get to talk to new people that show up and get to ask them, what brought you here? And it's a variety of things. It's pain. That's probably one of the biggest things. When people are struggling, they're hurting, pain in their life, they're like, I need something. I need something. So the church, when people are in a low spot in their life, it's just a time when they tend to go. When they have kids, we hear sometimes, well, we have kids and they get to an age and it's like, I grew up in church, and so I wasn't going, but I want my kids to grow up in an environment. I want them to have a foundation, or they're asking questions and I don't have answers. So, so there's different seasons in which we find ourselves looking for a church. Yep. And what do we do when we look for a church, right? We go to a place, we go looking for a place that is going to be comfortable, a place that is going to be welcoming, a place that's going to have things that we need. And when you do finally have, maybe you find the place, or you have an encounter with God in that place, or you come in the church, like everything about that church appeals to you. The one thing I know is the people who are most excited about our church are usually the people who've been here less than a year. Right? Yep. Because they found something that, maybe they found a relationship with God in an environment they didn't even know existed. I didn't know. We've heard people say, I didn't know church could be like this. Yep. Maybe their environment growing up was very different and they like this. And I know that what we do and how we do it stylistically, our methods, our strategy is very different than other churches. Yep. I just had an interesting conversation with a guy this last weekend. It was his first time he came, and he seemed like he really liked it. And so I was talking to him for a moment, and he said, can I ask you a question? He said, I noticed that y'all don't have crosses hanging up and in the building. And I said, yeah, we don't. And so then I kind of explained, it's like, I was just wondering why that is. And so I started to kind of explain a little bit of kind of just, who we're trying to reach, and a lot of people that have been turned off to the church, and that, even sometimes the symbols that they've seen in environments like that have been kind of the things that turned them off. And so we try to remove, so I was going through all this, and he was like,
which you're not saying because of the cross is offensive.
No. I'm just saying their experience in the church, or what they encountered through those places.
Yeah. Religious imagery gives off a very unapproachable place.
Yeah. And it wasn't a cross, but I told him it was people that have had certain experiences that they've kind of stepped away from God because of their religious experience, not because of God. Yes. And so I was explaining, I said, no, we believe very much in Jesus. And he was like, oh, no, I can tell, because of the message. He was like, no, I can tell. I was curious. And so, but there's a, but it's interesting.
As a side note, not to interrupt, as a side note, isn't it interesting? Doesn't that seem like a very Catholic question? I know because I've gotten that question before too. Churches I've worked at of why you don't have a cross. That seems like a very Catholic emphasis, because if you were going to have a symbol, why wouldn't you have an open tomb through the wall?
Just a big opening with
I just have a big open
slightly
through the wall.
removed a stone. It is interesting that the Christianity has been kind of symbolized by the cross, and there's so much importance in obviously what Jesus did on the cross, and so we're not belittling that, but there's also no prescription necessarily for the church to take the symbol of torture and pain and punishment and suffering and make that the the ark over the the buildings or the church, but and we don't have anything against them. It's just that it's a method, it's a strategy that we have done to try to reach people that don't feel comfortable. And so you could see him. It's just, oh yeah, no, I understand. Thanks for telling me. But it made me kind of just realize that in different seasons of our life, when we are desperate for change, that when we find that hope, or we find something that brings that change into our life, we create an emotional attachment with that moment. We create an emotional attachment with that place.
Yep.
We create an emotional attachment with that. And that can be a good thing. It can be a great thing. I love it when people will say, I love my church. I love it when people, I love this community. I love it. I enjoy that so much. The challenge comes is that as that community, that church, that changes, as it evolves, as it grows, what we can find is that a lot of times we start to not change with it or not like the change.
Right.
And we've seen that over the years. I've seen that over the years.
Yeah.
It changed the wall color. I remember when we moved to our first kind of first building we owned. And the first thing that we went in to do, and again, this was at the time, and who knows, it might be changing in the future, but we went in and we painted the ceiling not black, but like really, really, it was like one shade off of black. The only reason why we did that is because someone was freaking out. Again, we're a small church and we're trying to manage it. Someone was freaking out because they thought if we painted the ceiling black that it would be satanic. and again, you got to remember, this is back 15 years ago. Okay, so this was kind of like before a lot of churches, in our area, were really moving to try to create more of a modern environment that was a little darker and light, lights and some of that things that, have been very popular now. And it was just like the backlash over doing something like that. It was like you were taking something sacred away from it. I didn't know the color of the ceiling in the auditorium was sacred, but it was a sacred cow, as they say, right?
Yeah. But you know what's funny is it's one of those ironic things that people gravitate many times towards a place like this because the spirit of this place makes it different.
Yeah.
And then become surprised and offended when we continue to be different. The thought that just came to my mind is so many times it seems like people love a pioneer until they continue to pioneer. They love a revolutionary until they continue to revolutionize.
It's so true.
Isn't it true?
It's absolutely true.
They say, man, I have fallen in love with this place. It's so revolutionary, and I hope they camp out here forever.
So I had, think about that, right? The irony of that. I had a pastor say to me, as a friend of mine, we were getting ready to move into this facility. It's probably about 3 years ago, before we moved in here. And I remember having him tell me, he said, no, I'm just going to tell you something that someone else told me because they moved into their building before we did. There are a lot of people who've been with you for a long time that will absolutely love your church, but you move into the new building, within 1 year, they're going to leave.
I remember that.
You remember I brought him in to stay to our staff.
We were in Lancaster,
and
we moved in here.
Yeah, and you're kind of like, no, and he was like, trust me. He said there are people who gave sacrificially because they believe it, that like they saw the need for it. They saw that we were out of room. They knew the heart behind doing it and all that. And then the moment you go into a new space, they say, this doesn't feel like the same church.
Yep.
Well, it's a different building, but we're the same church. But then as we grow, and so through the years, here's what I know, and I want to apply this back.
Oh my gosh.
I want to take it back to a personal level.
But can I just put a little addendum on this? I got a taste of that a year before that when in March of 2019, I renovated the Lancaster campus. 60-year-old movie theater with carpet that was falling apart with worms and colors that made on the walls that made angels weep. I mean, this place was 50 years in the past and disgusting, and I thank God for it. But with the little bit of money that, because we never knew how long we were going to be in there, but a little bit of money, we tore out the carpet. We stained the concrete. We put fresh white paint on the walls. We modernized. I had a friend fly in that had been part of it, and he goes, okay, you guys just took a space that was several decades in the past and took it into the future. And, now we look back, we're in here, and it's nothing. But I'll never forget, in my naive mind, I'm expecting people to walk in and be like, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I had some people say, why are we just going to leave this concrete the way it is? It kind of feels a little different. And I'm like, they're going to take me to prison for murder. What? But it is so crazy. People, we resist change.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, even if the change in some of our minds could be better, we won't even allow ourselves to go there. And I think a lot of times it's not an intentional thing. I think it's not. I think it's really goes back to that emotional attachment.
Yes.
I think we attach a significant moment in our lives, and again, using this illustration for the church, because a lot of times people come to church because they're struggling. Yeah. They have an encounter with God. Mm-hmm. They have a moment, and what happens is they isolate that moment, and they, as you said, an attachment, and they associate God with that moment.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. God said, I'm doing a new thing. Mm-hmm. God is always on the move.
Yeah.
I want us to think about like this. Time is always flowing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we get stuck in a moment of time.
Stuck in a moment and can't get out of it.
I love this. Just keep going.
You got yourself stuck.
Yeah, second. Yeah,
you too?
I was enjoying that moment.
Are you gonna
I'm stuck in this moment now.
Stuck
no, I don't.
Okay.
But I think we can get I think if we want to know the way God is, okay, I think if we want to understand, and this is a unique construct, but if we want to understand God, I think we just think about time. Mm-hmm. Time is always moving. Time is never static. Mm-hmm. It's never standing still. When I look in Scripture, I think about the fact that, God says to the nation of Israel in Isaiah 43, behold, I'm doing a new thing. Mm-hmm. Do you not perceive it?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we become obsessed with, because of emotional attachment, with how something was done, the method of it, the way it looked, the environment, that when it changes, that we resist it. Mm-hmm. And I think the same, you can apply that back, happens in our own lives personally. On an organizational level, it's that way. But I think personally, we can fall so in love with one season in our life that we actually don't look forward, and we don't create a better future for ourselves in the future, because we are emotionally attached to what that season brought into our lives. And I think this is one of the reasons why even in church life people get stuck on a method.
Yeah.
Instead of just falling in love with the mission.
Right. Yep.
Or we've said before, people are more in love with their preference of church rather than the purpose of the church.
Yeah. Yep.
And I want our community, our church, to continually be evolving and changing.
Yeah. And you know what I think?
Because I want to continue to grow and change and evolve.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think, I'm trying not to go too deep here because we have very real examples of this, but I think
we always have fresh and real examples of this. This is an ongoing thing that I've experienced in church life.
But you know what? I think it's okay. I think one of the ways that you bust out of this, let me just say this, whether it's me or somebody else, I think one of the ways you bust out of this is by just being honest and acknowledging it.
Yeah.
Sometimes what I have observed, like you said, is usually the people that are the most excited are the people that are brand new. I just say this because I've known people that have followed Jesus for 20 years, been a part of our church for 10 to 15 years, will get caught up on a small preference thing, but will use the argument, but hey, if somebody new comes in or that doesn't know God comes in, they'll be frustrated. And the irony is always people new come in actually don't care. It's you that care. And part of what I want to say sometimes is don't feign a burden you don't have to cover up for preference.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's okay just to be honest and say, man, change sucks. Man, this is not my preference. Man, I'm really struggling with, I mean, let's just be honest. All of us as humans sometimes struggle with entitlement.
Yeah.
And we get used to something the way it is. And like you said, Andy Stanley, marry your mission, date your method. We fall so in love with the mission. We could say it this way, we fall more in love with the style of something than the spirit behind something. We fall more in love with the carpet around something than the character of something. You said preference. I think you could say it this way. Sometimes we fall more in love with the program than the purpose. One of the examples we were giving on an organizational level, I told you I thought about, was small groups.
Yeah.
In the church world, there's been kind of this phrase over the last 10 to 15 years, and a lot of it comes from Church of Highlands, a large church in Alabama, and they have a large church plant network called ARC, and one of the phrases that they use is, we're not a church with groups, we're a church of groups. And and really, it's this power of community, and it's part of the purpose is getting New Testament, Acts 2, everybody's in homes. Rick Warren, how, the staggering statistic that there's more people in his small groups than in his Sunday morning gatherings. And that the power of the church is in the community. And so the intent behind it is good, but a lot of us, just kind of adopted that. We're not a church with groups, we're a church of groups. To the point where every metric of health was around how many people were in small groups.
Right.
And you have to be in small groups. And almost at times, we probably, if we're just being really honest, I'll just point at myself, probably almost this unhealthy pressure maybe at times or judgment. Why are you not in a small group?
Right.
And let me clarify, I believe in small groups.
Sure.
I'm getting ready to lead a small group again here in 2 weeks. We just had our small group launch. I got friends that I invited to church who now have their lives changed through small groups. I think they're powerful. I think they'll always be important.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things, especially coming out of COVID, as we've just reassessed, we're like, hey, have we fallen more in love with the input than the output? Have we fallen more in love with the action than the result?
Yeah.
Because the truth is, there are people who organically are great at creating community, befriending people, and they have a ton of healthy community around them. They also have 7 kids currently with a busy schedule, and so the way their personality and schedules are wired, small group for this season isn't their thing.
Right.
But the purpose behind small groups community still exists in their life.
Yeah.
And so all that to say, I think there's so many things that we got to be careful we don't fall more in love with the program than we do the purpose.
Right.
With the preference than we do the purpose. With the method than we do the mission. And I think a lot of things, especially in this day and age, are becoming more either or both and than either or.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back. I want to say this. I think one of the ways that you remain flexible and open-handed is actually by having deeper anchors. And what I mean by that is, for me, when I gave my life to Jesus and fell in love with the church, for all that I've done wrong, one of the things I'm glad I think happened in a healthy way is my anchor in church was not around a style.
Yeah.
It was not around a style of music. It was not around, I'm sure I grew attachments to that, but as nostalgic as I am, it's always been about the mission of Jesus. It's always been about, I go into church and, Tommy Tenney, he used to say, he said, whenever, like Esther, you go into the courts, you've got to be the kind of person who, when you mature, you know how to lift your eyes above the courts.
Yeah.
In other words, you stay in church long enough, you're going to be disappointed. There's going to be people issues. There's going to be frustrations. You've got to have a deep enough anchor and purpose of why you go to church that even when all the horizontal stuff is going crappy, you have enough horizontal something going with God to where that anchors you to keep going. And when your anchor, look, community matters at church. Having preaching that engages with you matters. All of these things matter, feeling like God's called you there. But at the end of the day, I've got to have something deeper anchoring me to go there. God's put me here. I'm going, even if I hate the music in this season, or I'm not receiving from the preaching in the season, or whatever else, I'm going for God. I'm going because God's presence is there, and this is the bride of Jesus, and he is actually, this is what he put on the earth to change the earth, and he's called me to be a part of it, and he's called me not to neglect it or forsake it. And so even if everything goes to crap, or I disagree with a judgment or a call, or I disagree with this or I disagree with that, I've got enough of a deep anchor of a closed hand of what matters, then I can hold all the other things with an open hand.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a powerful place to be in our lives, to say my anchors are going to go deep enough to where I can be adaptable with everything else.
Yeah.
I can be adjustable with everything else.
Yeah.
I can be open-handed with all the other second-hand peripherals.
Yeah. I think it's a great thing to actually assess in our own lives too, personally, not just in the world of faith or church, but just in general. What are the things in our own life that have stopped growing? I was thinking about as a parent, when my daughters were young and they're little, all we want for them is to grow up, and we want them to change in a good way, because we know that as they get older, that they're going to mature, they're going to be, more equipped, they're going to be better adults, better people, So there's things, it's so interesting how when it's like until you reach an age, it's like we expect growth.
Yeah.
When we're young, we expect to grow up.
Yeah.
When we, when we're parents, we expect our kids to grow until they like go off to college or until they're like 20 something years old. And then it's like, we don't expect change.
Yeah, but even then, what's funny? Not to ruin your flow of thought, but it's so funny. I can laugh at this because I'm a non-parent, and maybe one day I'll understand. But what's hilarious to me is all my young parent friends post pictures of their kids from a year ago when they're smaller with crying face emojis. Mm-hmm. Oh, they've grown, they've changed, they've grown up. Please don't ever grow up.
Yeah. And isn't that the emotional attachment that happens with our kids when you go look back and go, oh my gosh, they were like that. Whereas I'm enjoying maybe again a little bit how I'm wired. I'm less nostalgic. I mean, go back and look pictures, and I got as my girls are older and they're kind of now developing their own lives. I can look at that and kind of be really sad over that, or I can look ahead to what the relationship looks like as friends with adults and realize that it can be beautiful, but it's going to change.
Yes.
And if I continue to treat them like they were 7 and not treat them like they're 20, then the relationship's not going to go well.
Yeah.
And I think that just even in our own lives, thinking about the I forget who's the author, but I love that book. What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Marshall Goldsmith.
Yeah, because I remember your team did it like a while ago.
Yep.
But that whole idea is something we need to adopt for life, for every aspect of life, is that what got me here won't get me there tomorrow. And I think a lot of times we are afraid of any kind of change and stepping into new, and because we are holding on to a moment in the past that we won't let go of. Hey, we can nostalgia. It's okay to remember. It's okay to celebrate. It's not okay to hold on to it so tightly that you can't get pulled into the future because you're holding on to a moment in the past. Yeah. And there was a quote that Erwin McManus, I was listening to a message that he said that I thought was just phenomenal. He said this: you can't create the new without becoming new. I'll say it again. You can't create the new without becoming new.
That's good.
And I love that because I think so many of us, we have this in our minds. We spent most of our young life and everything growing up thinking about the life that we're going to create. Then at some point we stop creating. And we just started living. Yeah. And the moment you stop creating the new and you just start living in what you have, you are stuck. Yeah. You are not going to move forward. And I want to grow as a person. Yeah. I look back the last 5 years of my life and go, I've grown more as a person in the last 5 years than I did the previous years combined. Yeah. Like, I'm glad for that. Like, I'm changing. I'm growing. If you're a person of faith, you should want that for your spiritual life. Right. If your spiritual life is not moving or growing, it's because you're stuck in an old moment that you've held on to.
Yeah, that's good.
And I just love that idea. You can't create the new without becoming new. Yeah. You cannot expect things to be, the future to be great if you're holding on to something and you won't allow it to kind of let it go enough to say, I'm going to embrace something that is uncomfortable, it's unfamiliar, it's uncertain. Stepping into the future is uncertain, it's unfamiliar. Yeah. And we're afraid of it. Yeah. And so we get comfortable with what we currently have now. And I think it's more than just even being comfortable. I think you have to, as you said, you have to recognize your emotional attachment. And some emotional attachments are really unhealthy. Yeah, we could probably list a million of them, but there are a lot of things that are unhealthy. And I think even when it comes to your church experience, an emotional attachment on the environment, the room, the space, the amount of people in the room. I mean, I remember there's a reason why a large portion of the people that were in our church when we were under 100 are not here today. Yeah. It's because when they went looking for a church, there was something in the size of our church or maybe something in our church that they really liked when we were under 100. Right. And then when it grows, they all of a sudden are like, I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't feel the same. It's not the same. We moved into this new building and I had someone tell me after, a year or so, they're like, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like home. And I'm like, because you were so attached to our last building. Right. The church is not about a building. Right. That's where you're attached to. I mean, I understand.
It's
and I
also,
understand.
can I just say this? It's also not about a feeling.
It's not about a feeling.
It's about a commitment. This is, I know we're going to get more spiritual.
Yeah.
I sometimes want to just cut through the fluff and simplify it. Like the way I look at it, there's a verse in Corinthians that talks about God set the members in place.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we feel like, oh, that pastor's called. Well, according to Scripture,
You're called.
You're called,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of like to just the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. Either God called you to a church or not.
Mm-hmm.
And if he did,
Yeah.
it better be God that brings you somewhere else, not preference or disagreement.
Or not the building's
or I don't feel the
different,
same, or I like. We've lost the art of committing ourselves to a group of people.
Mm-hmm. We have. And committing ourselves to change.
Yes.
We're not committed to change anymore.
Yeah.
For the first 21 years of our life, we're committed to change.
Mm-hmm.
We can't wait to change.
Yeah.
I can't wait to grow up. I can't wait to be on my own. I can't wait to be an
What
adult.
was the quote about clothes? Say it. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. So in this message, and again, this was from Erwin McManus, and so I was listening to a message that kind of got my mind spinning on all this stuff and thinking about church life. And he referenced, I think this was a quote or something that he heard before about how do you know when someone has stopped changing? And that's a really tricky thing to figure out, right? That could be really hard. How do you know? I think this could be a great assessment for everybody watching or listening now. How do I know when I've stopped changing? And this was the quote. He said, I heard someone say this once, the moment a man stopped changing his clothes is the year he stopped changing.
Wow.
Think about that.
So interesting.
In other words, you got trapped in the year that you fell in love with that fashion. And maybe you were fashion forward that year. Like, oh, this is
maybe
I
not
love
fell in
this
love
outfit.
with.
Maybe I fell in love, but this it felt comfortable.
That's
it felt
the year
me.
you stagnated.
That the moment you stopped. Now, again, that seems really superficial.
know.
So I want to just take it for what it's worth. But I think it's a sign.
It is
You know,
interesting.
because fashion always changes.
Right.
Music's always changing. Methods are always changing. The culture is always changing. So think about this. If the church, and again, using our context, is going to be relevant in reaching a world that's constantly changing, then we're going to have to modify the style of music. We're going to have to modify our space, our decor. We're going to have to modify our methods if we're going to continue to reach a world that's changing.
Right.
And I would argue that the reason why a lot of churches stop connecting with the world, the culture, and seeing real life change happen is because they got emotionally attached to a moment.
Yeah, that's good.
And they're still doing things the same way 30 years later. If our church still looks and feels the same 20 years from now, 10 years from now, we will have stagnated.
Yeah, it is a weird thing to serve the God of the new and stay stuck in the old. And it's so
it's just like the irony of that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
and I get it in one sense because there is a tension there because our message is timeless.
yes.
The core essence of the gospel never changes, and we don't dilute it or water it down or alter it.
And God never changes.
And God never changes.
But so what
He's always
changes?
doing a new thing.
So his method.
Yes, his method. Yeah.
So the miracles are still there all throughout
Yes.
Scripture,
And the character
but
is
the
still
method
there. Yeah.
in which he did the miracles always changed.
Right.
And what happened, especially in the Old Testament, was they became obsessed with the method. The Isaiah 43, by the way, that passage, before God speaking through the prophet Isaiah tells the people of Israel, hey, behold, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? What he said right before that was, hey, do you remember when I parted the Red Sea and I brought your ancestors through on dry ground?
Yeah.
Remember how awesome that was? Now forget all that.
Right.
He
Yep.
says, because I'm doing a new thing. Forget the past. I'm doing a new thing.
But what's
It
crazy
wasn't-
is the
it
same
wasn't
passage he tells them to remember.
Yeah, it doesn't mean, and ultimately I think what he's trying to say is it doesn't mean to forget the faithfulness of God
Yes.
and that God showed up for them.
Yes.
What they were obsessed with was how he did,
Yes.
not the fact that he did.
Yeah.
Because even that, after that, when it says, behold, I'm doing a new thing, do you not perceive it? I will make a way through the desert and wasteland, and I will bring water in the wasteland.
Yeah.
So it's funny, in the one picture, it was God getting rid of the water so they could walk through on dry ground. God uses that to juxtapose the position of, and now I can, in a dry place, bring water where it's not expected.
Yeah.
And so I just think that that's such a great reminder for all of us. And this is not just about church. That's just our context. That, I think, is what comes to our mind and how we see it play out in our world. But I think in our own personal lives, I think we have to recognize that the thing that really ultimately keeps us from growing, I think most of us would say, I don't care how old our kids get, I would say, I want to be a better dad. In order to become a better dad than I was yesterday, I have to change.
Yeah.
I want to be a better spouse.
Yeah. But
I want to be a better pastor.
The problem, though, is
I want to be
you ever,
more in shape. I want to eat better. I want to be healthier. I want to. We
Yeah.
all know the things that we want to do. What I'm challenging all of us with, and myself as well, thinking is, what is keeping me from actually moving forward to that?
Yeah, because you know what I think about. You ever heard of jojoba oil?
No. What's jojoba oil?
Jojoba oil.
Jojoba
I may be
oil?
saying it wrong, but I bought jojoba oil. Jojoba oil, because there was a while where I did peppermint oil, like on my scalp. It's supposed to be really good for your hair.
Essential
and your
oils.
head. And so, but peppermint oil, undiluted, is too strong, and it will irritate your scalp. So you have to have what's called a carrier oil, and one of the main carrier oils that you mix it with is jojoba oil. So you mix it, and sometimes you can cut it with a little bit of water, and then you put a little bit on, and you can rub it in your scalp. And I put this in the book, but the thought came to me a long time ago, like, pain is the carrier oil for change. We almost never change without pain.
Yes.
Pain is
I love it.
And so I think part of the trick is, how do you, without the carrier oil, how do you apply change to your life? You know, Donald Miller, famous business guy now, but wrote all the best-selling memoirs. And, he wrote the book Blue Like Jazz, memoir about his life. It blew up. Filmmakers came, said, we want to make a scene about your movie about your life.
Yeah.
They ended up making a movie about his life. So he wrote the book, A Million Miles in a Thousand Years, what I learned while editing my own life. And part of what he learned when they were putting his life into a movie is they had to keep changing things. And he was like, why are you changing this? And then as they went into all this stuff.
Because it's just not that interesting.
It's not that interesting. And then he said what really stood out to him is when he ended up in the movie, them having him just move away. They were like stuck on this scene, and he's like, why don't you just have him have a conversation where he moves away? And they said, because that's not how real life works. We need a bomb to go off. And he said, a bomb to go off? What do you mean a bomb to go off? And he said, don't you understand, in real life, whenever there's major change, there's always, and they said, you can watch this. Any movie you watch this. Before a character changes, there's what screenwriters call an inciting incident. Something blows up. There's a breakup.
Yeah.
Some sort of bomb goes off. Some sort of tragedy hits. And that's the only thing that makes characters in a movie change, because that's typically the only thing that makes human beings in life change.
Yeah. I agree.
And so
most people will not change until the pain of where they are becomes more unbearable than the uncertainty of the future.
Yeah. So I know we're wrapping up, but how do we, without waiting for pain to come, change?
I think you said something earlier that I want to go back to. I think when it comes to emotional attachments, and some people are more emotional than others, some are more nostalgic than others. I think first we need to recognize what our emotional attachments are. And I think a lot of times, if you want to say, where do I have an emotional attachment? And maybe to a point that it could be a healthy thing that happened in your life, but the emotional attachment can be unhealthy if it keeps you from moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think one of the first things you do is, or how do I identify those? I think I would look at the preferences that you will die on. What are those things that you are like so passionate about? Music these days is just awful. It's just terrible. Like, I had this pop top 40 stuff. Like, you remember back in the good old days when all it was rock, and that was good. Well, okay. You, in a certain space of your growth and existence, you fell in love with a style of music because it probably spoke to you in a way that it does. That doesn't mean that the music today is any less creative any less moving, any less this. It's just you didn't have an emotional attachment to it. And I get that. We all have different genres and styles of music. What I would say is this: when that preference becomes a hill you'll die on, that's when you're stuck on that hill.
That's good. Yeah.
when it's, see, I'm the type that's like, yeah, I don't really love Taylor Swift. I don't really love super modern pop. I don't. But if I don't allow our church to mold and shape the worship ministry, again, in a way that will connect with people today, if I hold us back to, well, worship music back in the 80s and 90s was so much better. I mean, that's what I grew up with, and we're going to go right back to what it was, go back to Stephen Curtis Chapman. We're going to go back to, Darlene Check, Hillsong, Shout to the Lord. We're going to go back. Hey, good stuff, great songs in its day. But if I think about worship music and style of worship music, it is drastically different than the way it was in the 90s. Because I was a worship leader at one point, so I know stylistically the way the instruments are played, the sounds, it's drastically different. But that's the way music has evolved, and it's the way it's changed, and what connects with the culture. And so if I get in the way, especially as a pastor, and I go, no, we need to do the songs that we did back in the early 2000s. Well, we're gonna be stuck. And so I would say it's not a preference. Preferences aren't bad. I would look at what are the preferences in your life that you're so passionate about that it's like, I refuse to give this up. And that's where it goes to what's deeper than my preference is my purpose. What's deeper? What's the deeper anchor that I say, that's the thing I should care the most about. What I should care the most about is that people have an encounter with God through the music and the worship that enables them to experience Him and brings them to a place of being able to offer their praise to Him. That's what I should care about, not the style.
It's funny. There's this phrase, it's kind of a cliche, but it's true, and it's used a lot in church circles, talking about like purpose and having deep anchor so that you can stay, open-handed. The phrase is, when you lose your why, you lose your way. Maybe for our intents and purposes, we could change it. When you lose your why, you get caught up on the ways.
I like that.
When you lose your why, you get caught up on the ways. I think another thing that is, I was thinking about it when you brought up the clothes thing, of one of the ways to bust out of the inertia of staying stuck in the past and being backwards facing is the kind of people you surround yourself with. So using a little analogy from this past weekend, I am towards the end of this final run, 7 miles in the mud, and the thought crossed my mind, even though, Brock gave me so much credit afterwards, like, Russ, you did it, like, this incredible and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I kind of had this sinking feeling, as difficult and almost unbearable as the trail was. I mean, I felt like I was training for the Marines. I had this thought that crept up towards the end of it. Russ, you're giving yourself almost too much permission to go slow. Now, I was aching and sore and tired and muddy and wet, but I knew my team was waiting on me, and I gave myself permission to walk a little bit more in the mud. I had that. So anyways, I'm in the final lap. I have final stretch. I have probably a quarter of a mile left, and this girl that I can just tell she's done this over and over again. I'll be honest, I was kind of trotting / walking. And
she came past you?
She came past, but not just came past. She goes, "Hey, you okay?" I said, "Yeah." "How are you doing?" She goes, "I'm good." She goes, "Come on." She goes, "We got this. We're going to trot the rest of this mile. We're going to finish this strong. Come on." And I was like, okay.
Yep.
So I ran right beside her the rest of the way.
That's cool.
It just shows the power of the people you're around that are either going to keep pulling you forward or you can just stay back in the past with them.
Yeah. I think it's such a great it's a great thought for every single one of us to take inventory of the people in our lives and ask this question: do you have some people that at times make you uncomfortable because they pull you forward?
Yes, it's great. Yeah,
I think we need to think about that. If everybody around you has the same preference, if everybody around you is fine with living a static life, then allow yourself to have some. And if you're part of this community, then allow us. It's not. I mean, I'm not always out there, but we're so committed to the purpose that we're not married to any method or preference or style, even our own. I got times I'm like, I don't know that this is what I would choose. Even graphics, because I used to do graphic design a long time ago when we started, and I see where graphics have gone and where they are now. And we've got Tucker and Hannah who are just killing it. I mean, with our graphics and social media and stuff. But I look at it and I go, it looks like a fourth grader just did that and put it down. You know what I mean? But yet,
Hannah and Tucker, if you're listening,
that's not
sorry. We
that's
I'm just kidding.
no, it's not a knock. But even like our design, think about for our season 2 graphics, they literally look like they're hand drawn.
But what's crazy, and I know that you would point this out, is national Instagram. Now I feel old. National Instagram, whatever.
National Instagram.
No, but I mean nationally followed Instagram accounts.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
what word I'm looking for.
They-
that of where
Like
church
pro-church
creatives
media,
gather
they
are
post-
constantly.
Oh.
I would say. I mean, I don't know if this is a brag or not. I didn't create
It's a
them.
brag on
but are
our team.
constantly reposting our team stuff
Yes.
more than almost any church
That's
in America.
That's what I mean. They have moved us graphically forward to a place that I'm looking at times going, this is what we want for a graphic, like this, you know. And again, but I'm also aware that this church, this community, everything about it will age out with me. And it'll be stuck in my preferences, and it'll be stuck in what I enjoyed, or even could be the season of growth that was most significant in our journey as a church. Could be that early things started to grow and take off, and here's what most people say. Well, it worked then. Yeah, because what got you there?
Yeah, won't get you there.
So here's what you have to understand. Success is maybe the greatest enemy of change, right? I'm not the first to say that. We've heard that before.
Yeah.
Success is right? It worked then.
Yep.
So why change it? Because what got us here is not going to get us there.
Yep.
Because everything else around us is changing. And if we don't change and adapt to that, we are going to be left behind.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to, I think you mentioned like the people that are around you, but I would say you got to have some people in your life that are going to pull you even a little bit uncomfortably into the future.
Yep.
And here's a simple way. If you go, man, I don't know, am I stuck and I'm not moving forward? Here's a real simple thing you can do. Go out and buy something you would never wear and wear it.
Yes.
Now, I try to stay up on it. I do recognize there are some trends that I look at and go, okay, that might be appropriate for a 20-year-old to wear, not someone my age, but I want to stay in step with even fashion trends and other things, partially because in what I'm doing and what we do is speak to a vast audience, is that I want there to be relatability. I want a 17-year-old to sit in there and go, I can relate to him versus me looking like I'm dressed like her grandfather or great grandfather dresses. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to be relatable, but I also like it. I like fashion. I like clothes. And so but I do think that can be a real simple challenge. That whole, you can tell when a man stopped changing.
Yep.
And I'd say you can add a woman in that. You can tell when a woman stopped changing. Or here's another one. This one might be a little bit different than clothes because it's easier to change your clothes, but I mean, I was doing this for a while and I kind of haven't, but it's like, if you haven't changed your hairstyle at all, at all. Now, there are some people like Trey, who's in our church, who changes his hair every 3 weeks.
Yes.
I mean, it's blonde now again and spiky, but then it'll be buzzed really soon.
I think about this because,
but I've tried changing. I did my hair, side part. I did all that because that was trendy. My wife looks at pictures. She goes like, "I told you that wasn't a good look for you back then. That actually makes you look older than you look now."
I know you look younger than you ever looked.
That's what I mean. But that's because that's changing my hair. I was trying not to be stuck in a season. But I think to wrap it all up, I think we all, on a personal level, I think we all actually want change. In other words, there are things that I would look at and go, let me say change, growth.
Yeah.
I think all of us want to keep growing. I want to be wiser. I've got to grow in wisdom. I want to be kinder. I want to be more loving. I want to, I want to be I think all of us will look at it and go, yeah, I want that.
Yeah.
Well, what's keeping us from doing it then? Well, there's a lot of bad habits. But I think underlying a lot of those things, if we're really honest, there is maybe an unhealthy emotional attachment to something in one season that is keeping you from stepping into a new one.
Yeah, it's good. That's good.
So It's a good challenge.
Great conversation.
Go buy something new that you would normally wear. Mm-hmm. My wife got me for I think it was Easter. It was either Easter or last year's Inspired Conference, because I spoke at it. It was around Easter. We were at PacSun.
The leather jacket?
No, that was Audrey's.
Oh, okay.
No, we were at PacSun, and she found this shirt that she was like, dude, this shirt's so cool. You get this. You should wear this. And I was like, really? And my wife's great at helping me, because she sees, trends, and she'll be like, no, you should get that. I'm like, I don't wear that. She's like, no, you should. That's cool. I'm like, it is? Okay. And but it was this. It reminded me of almost the 70s. It was like this velour shirt that was like had a collar, velour. I mean, literally, I feel like it was. And here's the thing about fashion. Fashion cycles about every 30 years.
Oh my gosh!
The clothing, the pants, everything comes back around. It's so funny.
It's so funny. I remember working when I worked at the Buckle in my like early 20s. And I remember people, like some older people, would come in and they'd be like, "Man, it's so interesting. This was in style when I was blah blah." And I remember kind of like secretly judging them, like, "Man, you're old." Now I'm watching it. I'm like, that's in style.
And you know what's funny? It's
like
here's what I found. This is true about clothing. I feel like it's about a 30-year cycle for clothing. Sometimes a little less, but 30-year cycle, right, or more. And what I've found is those who lived through it the first time refuse it, even if it was them back then, because they were still changing.
Right. Yeah.
It's what I found is the people like, I remember when flare jeans came back recently, and I remember when bell bottoms come back. The only people that were buying them were the younger ones who didn't go through it the first time.
Yes. That is such a good observation.
So the young people are all like, dude, isn't this awesome? And all the other people are going, dear God, I can't believe those are back. And why are they wearing them? Even if they wore them when they were a kid, what happened is, or when they were young, is that they were still changing.
Yes.
As culture was changing.
Yes.
Then they reached a point where they stopped changing.
Yes.
And culture kept changing, even if it evolved back around to what it was before. So that's just a fascinating observation about change.
Interesting.
So go and buy. That's the challenge, right? Go buy something you maybe wouldn't normally wear and sport it. Just put it on. Wear it proudly.
Yep.
And when all your friends who haven't changed look at you and go, dude, what are you wearing? Just look at them going, what are you wearing?
That's a good one.
Because I'm changing. I'm growing. What are you wearing?
Your stuff
is so 20 years old.
So 20 days old.
Your fashion's so old. So anyways, unhealthy emotional attachment.
That's good.
Look for them. It's good.
Have you ever taken the attachments test?
No. I think you were telling me about this like a couple weeks ago.
Someone tried to get me to take it a while back, but I haven't taken it yet. But there's so much around it. You never taken it?
No, never have. Maybe we need to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Hopefully this conversation's encouraged you, provoked you. It's been a great conversation.
Tick some people off?
Yeah, maybe. It's okay.
What are the things that you are stuck in when it comes to church life that you don't like now about current church? I'm really curious. Just one last thing. I think maybe we mentioned this before, and we both really appreciate someone like Erwin McManus, who's 64 years old, but on the forward end and always has been, on trends and all this stuff. But it's just really fascinating that during COVID, and we've talked about this, that they went in and like rechanged the whole look aesthetic of their auditorium and everything. And they might be trendsetters. I'd be really curious. I mean, it's hard when you've got a building that's big and it's painted a certain way to want to repaint it all. Yeah. It's very costly, but it's just fascinating. I wonder what our stylistically and environmentally, aesthetically, I wonder what our spaces will look like in 10 years. And will we keep it up? Or will our building still look the same and look 15 years old in 10 years? Yeah, I don't want to send us on another trail, but, I think part of the problem is churches like ours. The good thing is we so value excellence, and we so value people coming in and feeling welcome and feeling comfortable. But if you think about it, comfort is the enemy of change. And isn't it crazy? There are countries all over the world where the gospel is illegal, and people will hike through miles of snow and life endangerment to get there, and the venue will change every single week. And we have a beautiful building. Because it's underground. And people will get frustrated if we change the
whatever
color or do something.
Change the color. Or, yeah.
Yeah.
Or something.
I'll tell you what.
Preference.
One of these days we'll change our set again. It's kind of difficult to do and costly, but I'm about ready for a set change here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like it though.
Yeah.
But, don't want to get too static.
No.
It's good.
No. All right, good convo. Let's think about the ways that we want to change, need to change, and go buy something new. Until next week, we will see you then.